we've had the state budget now just very, very recently. And I saw ahead of that, you, the Chamber of Commerce, put out your wish list. I was going to say grievance list, but your wish list for what you were hoping to find in the budget. How did it go?
So for your listeners, Antonio, every year Business SA, being the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, puts to the Treasurer of the day a pre-budget wish list. And we certainly did that. We did it a little bit earlier this year. We actually did this some months ago. So we did it very early in calendar year 2021. And it's important we do. It's always important to be early because the early bird gets the worm. And
there's a long process anyway in decision making.
It's a long process because the state government really starts working on their state budget in January, February. And it's something then, of course, that the Treasurer will announce towards the end of June, which the Treasurer have very recently done on Tuesday this week. So there are some good parts about what was announced in the budget, and there are some opportunities missed, which were not announced in the budget, which Business SA had also been advocating for. But I'll start with the positive side of the ledger if I can. So at a macro level, the state government is forecasting that there will be a 3.5% rate of growth for the state economy for next financial year. They had a preordained economic growth target of 3%. In all likelihood, they will comfortably beat it in the 21-22 upcoming financial year. So that's a good outcome. And although that doesn't mean at a granular level a lot to a lot of people, it does, because if the state is growing, there is a very tangible trickle-down effect towards you and me and our jobs and everything else. So that's positive. Also, there are some announcements which we're looking at, but certainly the Great State Voucher Scheme, whereby the Treasurer announced another $4 million towards the Great State Voucher Scheme. That was one of our recommendations out of the 13 recommendations that we made some months ago, because if they orientate this voucher scheme more towards the city has really borne the brunt in many ways of the turbulence of the last 12 months. So hotels, accommodation providers, city restaurants and the like will be direct beneficiaries of this $4 million grant, or not this grant, but this $4 million program. We see that as a very good thing. That's good news. Some of the infrastructure projects we've been advocating for. So if you go out into regional South Australia on the, let's say, for example, the Augusta Highway, if you're heading towards Port Augusta, the vast majority of that road at the moment is one lane in either direction. And you would have to argue that ultimately that's not safe. Ultimately, that's not going to underwrite any form of meaningful growth in our regional towns and cities. So there's certainly been a fairly hefty funding commitment towards, I think it's $180 million, towards some form of duplication of the Augusta Highway, which effectively means two lanes in either direction for more of that road, but not all of that road. That's a positive thing, and they're putting some seed funding in towards doing the preliminary work for the kind of the third stage of that, which will probably come in future years anyway. So that's good. It's not always the most glamorous project, but I must say it's a very necessary project. Drive into regional Victoria and you're pretty well always driving on dual lane carriageways wherever you go. They're a lot safer.
Yeah. Infrastructure is something we've discussed several times here, especially the last time you're on here. And so it is important. That's a major role that the government can fulfil in what is a market economy, and it improves the functioning of the economy. But that 3.5% growth, that's just Australia's trend growth rate. So not fantastic. Maybe it's because we are generally a bit below the national average. But coming out of a recession, you'd want to see a 4 as the first digit.
Well, there's a somewhat perverse nature to this, because of course we may do better than the 3.5%. I hope we do. The reality is that we're probably a lot more likely to do the 3.5% growth, or if not better, because we're coming off a lower base due to the turbulence of last year. If last year had been plain sailing, I'm not sure if the state government, truth be told, would have been as confident in achieving even a 3.5% growth rate, because at that point in time, their 3% growth rate was looking fairly nebulous anyway. So, it's one of those kind of almost perverse outcomes of the last 12 months. Another really good thing, though, is that when you talk to, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners would kind of echo this sentiment, one of the tougher parts of being in business right at the moment is, for a lot of business operators, is not necessarily demand. It's actually skills and labour. It's the ability to recruit and retain skilled labour. And if we're talking in the building industry and a whole range of other industries, and in some areas also unskilled labour. So a lot of business owners are saying to us, Antonio, wow, for the first time in a few years, we've actually got lots of orders. There is demand. I mean, South Australians are not spending their money overseas or interstate, of course, and those funds are circulating around South Australia, and that's good for local businesses, and clearly we commend that. But they can't get staff, so the government has extended the support program, financial support program, which is a partnership between the state government and the federal government, for another 12 months, which effectively means that an employer can bring on an apprentice, and as a result of doing so, actually receive up to about $32,000 a year as a joint state government, federal government support in order to bring on that apprentice. So you'd kind of argue, with that level of support, why wouldn't you? And we're really encouraging employers, if they are even vaguely thinking about bringing on an apprentice, given the state government's just extended this program through to 30th of June 2022, it's a really good time to do it.
We've talked about growth, infrastructure. What's the perspective from an SME that's a very important part of the South Australian economy?
Antonio, this is the important point. So whilst we acknowledge that at a macro level, from a infrastructure spending perspective, so some degree from a program perspective, like the continuation of the support for apprentices and trainees, and they also have a commensurate waiver of payroll tax, which accompanies taking on a apprentice or trainee over the next 12 months also for that employee, not for your whole company. But we think they're good measures by the state government. Credit where credit's due. We commend them on them. And I'm just holding up. So that is that's the state government budget document, which was handed down to everybody on Tuesday. However, if we look at which community since March 2020 has borne the largest and almost disproportional brunt of the turbulence, it's not so much the corporate market. They've had the resources to weather the storm. Notwithstanding, it's probably been difficult, but they've had the balance sheet where they can do it. But the real pain has been felt at a small to medium size business owner level. Huge uncertainty, not having the cash reserves. Thank God, I must say, for JobKeeper, it was a very good program. It literally saved thousands, if not tens of thousands of businesses. But we were hoping to see, as a result of the Treasurer handing down the 2021-2022 state budget, two key things. One of them is more tailored programs to assist small to medium-sized business owners, of which there's a minimum of 50,000 in South Australia who employ people, and then there are tens of thousands of sole traders on top of that. But we were hoping to see that there would be some programs which would help them sustain their enterprise. And I'm not talking about handouts. I'm talking about programs around strategic training to provide them in how to design a strategy to sustain their enterprise. Correct. Financial literacy training, digital literacy training, governance training, these types of things, because what the business community knows is that the last 12 months has been about survival. The next 12 months is going to have to be about sustainability. This won't be their last pivot. This won't be their last pivot. They're going to have to change and then change again. And I must say the budget was relatively bereft of anything of that nature. There is a $200 million jobs growth fund. We don't know the exact detail. We actually don't know whether that $200 million is all new money. We don't know if it's actually carry forward money from previous financial year, which is a famous trick of government. So we hope it's new funding. We hope most of it's new funding. But nonetheless, why don't we purpose or repurpose funds towards actually more direct support to the risk taker, to actually the person who's holding the whole show together, which is the business owner. If they falter, so do all of their employees. And we think that's very, very important. The other opportunity which we think is missed is that South Australia, because of what we were talking about earlier, Antonio, because of our renewable energy leadership, which is global leadership, it's not just national leadership, it's global leadership, is that it really does beckon some fairly detailed thinking around a strategy for South Australia to really leverage its skills, its prowess, its reputation, and become a global player, not just a national player, not just a state player, but a global player into the export of what I would call renewable technologies. And that can be energy, that can be circular economy, that can be waste, that can be land care, that can be a whole range of things. Now, we're doing well in parts, but we actually don't have an overarching strategy to inform the way forward.
Yes, indeed. I'm very pleased to hear your interest in the development of the human capital of our capacity of our industry.